Wars in the Middle East rarely stay in the desert. Somehow they always end up at gas pumps, grocery stores, and Wall Street. Because beneath that sand sits the fuel of modern civilization. And the global economy runs on it like a caffeine addict. Roughly half of the world's proven oil reserves sit in the Middle East. That makes the region less a battlefield, and more the planet's gas station. But every time conflict erupts here, oil markets panic. And when oil panics, the global economy gets very nervous. One narrow waterway holds the world's energy hostage. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly 1/5 of global oil. If that route closes, oil markets react instantly. Think global financial panic, but with gasoline. And then there's OPEC, the world's most powerful energy club. Imagine a cartel, but everyone wears suits and holds press conferences. When OPEC reduces supply, oil prices climb fast. When war enters the equation, they climb like a rocket. And history shows this pattern again and again. War in the Middle East. Economic chaos everywhere else. The first time the world truly learned this lesson was 1973. And the shock hit faster than anyone expected. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The Yom Kippur War had begun. Egypt's leader Anwar Sadat wanted to reclaim lost territory. Israel's Prime Minister Golda Meir suddenly faced a national emergency. Meanwhile in Washington, President Richard Nixon backed Israel. That decision would soon shake the global economy. Arab oil producers saw an opportunity, and they decided to use oil as a weapon. The oil embargo of 1973 had begun, and the world economy was about to feel it. Arab members of OPEC cut oil exports to the United States. Their message was clear: support Israel, lose access to oil. Within weeks, oil shipments to the West dropped sharply. Tankers simply stopped arriving at American ports. Oil prices exploded from $3 a barrel to nearly $12. In economic terms, that is the equivalent of a financial earthquake. Fuel shortages appeared across the United States almost overnight. Americans suddenly discovered their cars needed patience. Some drivers waited hours just to buy gasoline. Others simply ran out before reaching the pump. Gas stations began posting signs reading, "No fuel today." It was the first time modern America truly felt an oil shock. Meanwhile, inflation surged across Western economies. Prices climbed while economic growth slowed. Economists called the new phenomenon stagflation. It meant inflation and recession arriving at the same time. President Richard Nixon faced growing pressure in Washington. The energy crisis was becoming a political nightmare. Nixon introduced emergency energy measures to calm the crisis. One rule shocked drivers: the new national speed limit. Driving slower saved fuel across the country. For Americans used to speeding, it felt almost unpatriotic. Meanwhile, European economies also struggled with rising energy costs. Factories slowed as fuel became more expensive. Airlines cut flights and shipping costs surged worldwide. Energy had suddenly become the world's most powerful economic weapon. The oil embargo lasted only a few months, but its economic shock lasted years. And the world had learned a brutal lesson. War in the Middle East could shake the global economy. Just a few years after the 1973 oil shock, another crisis erupted. This time the chaos began inside Iran. Iran had been ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, but millions of Iranians were ready for revolution. Demonstrations spread across Tehran and other cities. The monarchy was losing control. In early 1979, the Shah fled the country. A political earthquake shook the Middle East. Soon a new leader returned from exile in France. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini arrived to lead Iran. The revolution transformed Iran into an Islamic republic. But global oil markets feared something worse. Iran was one of the world's largest oil producers. Revolution chaos caused production to collapse. Global oil supply suddenly shrank again. Prices began rising rapidly around the world. The second oil shock had arrived, and inflation surged across Western economies. In Washington, the Federal Reserve faced a dangerous problem. Inflation was spiraling out of control. The man tasked with solving it was Paul Volcker. He would become the most feared banker in America. Volcker raised interest rates dramatically to crush inflation. Borrowing money suddenly became painfully expensive. The policy worked but triggered a deep recession. Factories closed and unemployment climbed. Just as economies began recovering, another crisis appeared. This time it involved Saddam Hussein. In August 1990, Iraq invaded neighboring Kuwait. The move shocked the entire world. Kuwait controlled enormous oil reserves. Now those reserves were in Saddam's hands. Oil markets reacted instantly. Prices surged as traders feared supply collapse. President George H.W. Bush organized an international coalition. The goal was simple: force Iraq out of Kuwait. Operation Desert Storm began in January 1991. Coalition forces launched massive airstrikes. Iraqi forces soon began retreating from Kuwait. But Saddam Hussein had one last destructive idea. Retreating troops ignited hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells. The desert sky turned black with smoke. Nearly 600 oil wells burned for months. It became one of the worst environmental disasters ever recorded. Eventually, the fires were extinguished. But the economic shock had already spread worldwide. Energy markets stabilized after the war ended. But the pattern was becoming clear. Every major conflict in the Middle East shook energy markets, and the global economy felt the shock. Yet history was not finished repeating itself. Another war was already approaching. The next crisis would begin in Iraq again, and it would reshape global oil markets once more. In 2003, the United States prepared to invade Iraq. The world watched nervously as another war approached. In March 2003, the United States launched the invasion of Iraq. President George W. Bush announced the beginning of the war. Britain joined the invasion under Prime Minister Tony Blair. The coalition aimed to remove Saddam Hussein from power. Coalition forces advanced rapidly toward Baghdad. The Iraqi army struggled to slow the offensive. Airstrikes targeted Iraqi military infrastructure across the country. The campaign was called Shock and Awe. Within weeks, Baghdad fell to coalition forces. Saddam Hussein's government collapsed. But the war created new uncertainty in global energy markets. Oil traders feared long disruptions in Iraqi supply. Oil prices began climbing steadily in the following years. Energy markets remained nervous about instability. By the mid-2000s, oil prices were rising sharply. Global demand and geopolitical risks pushed prices upward. Oil would eventually approach $100 a barrel. High energy costs strained many economies. Energy costs were rising just before the financial crisis. Many economists later noted the connection. The global financial crisis struck in 2008, but Middle East tensions never truly disappeared. In the years that followed, new geopolitical tensions emerged. One of the most serious involved Iran. Iran sits near the world's most important oil shipping route. The Strait of Hormuz carries massive energy flows. Any conflict there could disrupt global oil transport. Markets watch the region very carefully. Relations between the United States and Iran have been tense. Military incidents occasionally raise global concern. Even rumors of conflict can move oil prices. Energy markets react instantly to danger. The global economy still depends heavily on oil, and much of that oil still comes from this region. That reality has not changed in 50 years. Energy still drives the global economy. Looking back, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Middle East wars often shake global markets. 1973 brought the first modern oil crisis. The world learned how powerful energy politics could be. 1979 brought another shock after the Iranian Revolution. Oil supply disruptions triggered inflation worldwide. 1990 brought the Gulf War after Iraq invaded Kuwait. Energy markets panicked once again. 2003 brought another war in Iraq. Oil markets remained nervous for years afterward. 4 wars, 4 economic shocks. The pattern has repeated for decades. Global markets remain deeply connected to Middle Eastern stability. Investors watch every headline carefully. Because history has taught a powerful lesson. Conflict in this region rarely stays local. The battlefield may be far from most countries, but the economic impact travels everywhere. Every conflict shifts the price of energy, and energy shifts the entire global economy. The lesson from history is surprisingly simple. Energy and geopolitics are permanently linked. And until the world moves beyond oil dependence, Middle East wars will continue to shake the global economy.